Hey everybody, how are you doing? So today I wanted to talk a little about the stocks or industries I avoid. I think in my last video I talked about some mega trends. And so I mean those mega trends are basically reasons why I invest in some stocks that I have in my real money portfolio. But today I want to look at the opposite side, stocks and industries I avoid. So I remember talking about a concept called via negativa, and basically I run a concentrated portfolio, and so I must exclude a lot of stocks. And actually that's not too difficult because that there are only a few very good and high quality companies out there. And the other thing is I don't really understand a lot of companies as well, so it's not that difficult actually to exclude a lot of companies. So let's start. So the first thing I look at, I don't want to buy a company which is in the sunset industry, or what I call typewriter companies. So of course, a company selling typewriters, that would be, in the sunset industry. Nobody really uses typewriters anymore. We have computers. So why would you ever want to invest in such a company with such, dim prospects? And that brings me to another category of stocks. And this might be a little controversial, but I generally tend not to invest in all stocks either. And for a similar reason, I think that the world is going electric basically. And of course, I understand the explanation that electricity comes from oil, but if you look at some of the largest consumptions of oil in terms of motor vehicles, that's one of the largest consumptions of oil. And if all those vehicles go electric, which I think is the trend and which I think will happen, maybe not in the next 5 years, but possibly in the next 10 years or 15 or 20 years. So, why even invest in a industry that, is on the decline when there's so many other industries and companies that you can invest in that have mega trends behind them. So that's another category of stocks I avoid. I generally don't invest in pharma or biotech companies. I mean, the first reason is I don't really understand a lot of these companies. I mean, they produce so many drugs, and you know who's to say another startup bio or pharma company comes up with the next big drug, which totally makes irrelevant some of the drugs the big pharma companies are selling, and that would totally decimate their business. I mean, there are some exceptions. Like I would consider investing in a very diversified pharma company. You could call it a pharma company like Johnson & Johnson, but Johnson & Johnson also has many other divisions to it. It has the consumer division, and it also has the medical instruments division. So that would be one possible exception, but in general, I don't invest in pharma companies. Another reason for not investing in pharma companies is also I think some of their business practices are quite illegal, or at least unethical, in terms of how they raise prices on drugs and exploit the customer, which I'll come to in a bit later as well. I generally don't invest in restaurant stocks as well, so companies like McDonald's, you know, Wendy's and so on will be out for me. Nothing against restaurant stocks. I just think that they don't have a very strong moat. And I mean, I must say that McDonald's is one of the strongest moats you can have. But I feel there is still a lot of competition. I mean, basically, any food outlet is competition to McDonald's. So while McDonald's would thrive, I'm sure it will thrive in the next decade and decades to come. I think it's an industry that has a lot of competition in it. So why do I need to invest in such industry? I can find another better industry with this less competition. For example, the aviation industry in building planes, it only has Boeing and Airbus. Or in payments, is only Master or Visa generally for debit cards, right? So why invest in industry that's so competitive? Generally, I don't invest in stocks that are less than 2 billion in terms of the market cap. Uh, you know, some people think you should invest in small caps, but I generally want to invest in more established companies, and I think the returns can still be very good, as you can see in the account, and I'm sure yes, you will see going forward as well. I generally don't invest in banks because, again, I think there are a lot of banks out there. There's a lot of competition. I can invest in the industry where there's not that much competition and deliver superior returns. And then the second reason is also that banks are prone to what I call financial engineering. I've spoken about Fund Smith and Terry Smith. He doesn't invest in banks either, and he was working in the bank industry for many years, I believe. So I guess he has some insight into their inner practices as well, how they can manipulate the balance sheet and their statement accounts, and that makes it a risky bet. So generally, I try to avoid banks. Of course, I don't invest in stocks I don't understand. I mean, there's so many stocks. The pharma companies could fall in that category as well, and very highfalutin, high tech kind of companies where I just don't understand where the technology will be in the next few years or decades. I'd rather not invest in those kind of stocks. I generally don't invest in stocks that are deep in debt either. I mean, there could be exceptions where the the valuation of that company is just so rock bottom that it's a no-brainer kind of situation to buy into that company. But generally, I wouldn't want to invest in something that's very high in debt. I think you need a certain amount of financial fortitude to withstand, economic recessions and so on. So, a company like AT&T, which I think has a lot of debt, I probably not want to invest in that. And one of the reasons would be the debt. I generally tend not to invest in stocks which are speculative. Which is just based on speculation that it's going to rise very high. Tesla could possibly fall in this category. I mean, Tesla does have a business model and it does have some very good cars actually that is selling. But if you look at the valuation, I think it's very speculative. Another one, of course, not really a stock, but that would be Bitcoin. Is based on the hope that Bitcoin will become mainstream one day. And I'm not going to invest on something just on the base of hope. Hope is not an investment strategy. Generally, I don't invest in IPOs as well because you just get to know this company usually, and you get to see its financial account. So don't really have a grasp of its financials that well until at least a few years after the IPO. Unless, of course, it's a company like IKEA. If it suddenly decides to go and do an IPO, you do know about the business, quite well. But of course, you don't know the financials and it takes time to understand the financials. Generally, I don't want to invest in tobacco stocks or sin stocks. I mean, some of these tobacco stocks operate in monopolies, but I still feel the general trend is that people will smoke less. I mean, everyone wants to live longer, and smoking is a clear way to to damage your body and damage your lungs. And I think overall smoking consumption will decrease. So you could even say it's in a sunset industry. But of course, it has that addictive quality to it. So it's not easy to kick the habit. But I think over time, governments may try to enforce stricter regulations. I already see the smoking age being raised in many countries. And that will definitely hurt the profits of some of these tobacco companies. Sin stocks, I guess, gambling companies, or even companies that are, in the weapons industry, purely in the weapons industry. I think generally the world needs less of these kind of products or services. So as the world becomes more peaceful, more kind and more happy, you probably won't have such a great need for these kind of products or services. I know that's a very, maybe airy fairy, lofty and hopeful kind of thinking. But again, it comes back to my basic point that, I can find better companies, better industries with mega trends behind them. So I don't need to invest in something that I think will decline at least sometime in the future. So there you go, guys. There are the stocks or industries I generally tend to avoid. That makes investing a bit easier for me. It's easier to find the high quality companies I'm looking for. In terms of the real money portfolio, we are halfway through, more than halfway through February. The account has been treading water a bit during the month of February, but I do expect it to pick up, in the rest of the year. So, everyone, I hope you enjoy this and have a great day.